Welcome. Welcome to the launch of Bernie Sanders' new book, It's Okay to be Angry About Capitalism. The German edition will be in stores in 2 days, but you can already get the German book, Es ist okay, über den Kapitalismus wütend zu sein, auf den Kapitalismus wütend zu sein, here at the event. Tonight is Bernie Sanders' only public event in Germany during his European tour. Twice did he run for President of the United States. And many people say with two of the most progressive grassroots campaigns in US history. He is the longest serving independent in Congress. And he's convinced that if you fight for the working class, you can win support across the political lines. He sees his new book as a blueprint for progressive change. That is here tonight has been made possible by his publisher, Tropen in Berlin, in cooperation with the Rosa Luxemburg Foundation, the American Academy in Berlin, and the daily newspaper Taz. Now, please welcome Senator Bernie Sanders.
Thank you. Thank you.
Mr. Sanders, before we talk about the important issues you raised in your book, I think a lot of us, probably all of us, are closely watching the war in the Middle East. Everybody is really concerned, and I just want to ask you, because you've just put out a statement like a day ago, where you were warning about the long-term effects of Hamas terrorist assaults on Israel. What are the consequences? What are the long-term effects as far as you're concerned?
Before we get to the long-term consequences, I think we should deal with the immediate reality. What Hamas did is unspeakable. And that act of terrorism has already cost thousands of lives in Israel and among Palestinians. The long-term impact is that at a time when people all over the world were looking at the Israeli occupation of Gaza and were deeply concerned, because before this week, unemployment among young people in Gaza was something like 75%. Water was intermittent. Electricity was intermittent. In other words, the living conditions there were absolutely terrible under Israeli occupation. And people all over the world, in the United States Congress, and I'm sure in Europe, and in Israel, some very brave people said, we have got to do something about that. And then, in the midst of that, comes this horrific terrorist attack, and the world will not forget the images of Hamas members on motorcycles mowing down young people, the Israelis who were dancing. And that will absolutely set back for the indefinite future any prospect for peace in the region and, in fact, justice for the Palestinians. And I'll tell you something else that worries me, is that, as many of you may know, half of Gaza, the population of Gaza is about 2 million, half of that is our children. And I'm worried very much now what the consequences of this war are going to be for the women and children who right now, as I understand it, have no electricity, medical supplies have been cut, while there's massive bombing, etc. So, to my mind, Israel has every right in the world to respond vigorously to destroy Hamas and those terrorist attacks. But I hope very much that we can spare the children the impact of what Hamas has done.
But maybe you can talk about the long-term effects, though. I mean, it's really hard to imagine any peace process, right, at the moment.
Well, I mean, it has set back everything, and not to mention embroiled the entire region. We don't know what Hezbollah is going to be doing. So it has inflamed the entire region, and it has given ammunition to the extremists on both sides. So if you are Netanyahu or a right-wing member of his cabinet, then you get up and say, see, we told you all along. You can never trust the Palestinians. The peace process is useless. They've got to be annihilated. They've got to be defeated. They've got to be broken, whatever. And then if you're on Hamas's side, you say, see, I told you that if we plan intelligently, we may not be able to defeat Israel militarily, but we can incur real damage. We've done it. And we have to continue doing that. So the extremists, people who believe in violence in both sides, benefit from this, while the peace process and the desire to improve life in Gaza suffers a major setback. It is a real tragedy, and I can't think of any other word to describe it.
So how should the international community respond?
Pardon me?
How should the international community respond?
Well, I think we have got to make sure that Israel is able to go a long way toward destroying Hamas's ability to attack like that again. But at the same time, in my view, we've got to make sure that Israel does not overreact in the sense of causing massive pain to women and children who had nothing to do with these attacks.
Now, many people are unsettled due to all the international crisis we are seeing due to the war in Gaza and in Israel in a way that also plays a role in the issues you raised in your book. So let's focus on them. Let's look at the US. Currently in the US, we see a historic strike of auto workers. It's the first time in the history of the trade union that there's a strike against all the big automakers at the same time. The president of the union speaks about a one-sided class war. What does this tell us about the US?
Do you mind if I stand occasionally?
Please feel free.
I mean, that's a good question and an important question, and it takes us very much to what is going on economically in the United States. The reason that this strike by the UAW against the major automobile manufacturers is so popular, and the last poll that I have seen has 75% of the American people supporting the strikers. And the reason for that is the issues in the automobile industry dealing with corporate greed are exactly the same issues that are permeating all aspects of American society. So when the UAW goes up there and they said, let's see what's going on. The companies are making huge profits. They are. The CEO of Ford is making $29 million a year. Guy who heads Stellantis, $25 million. Ford, $21 million. And yet, workers who enter the industry right now are making $16 or $17 an hour. Over the last 20 years, the real inflation accounted for earnings of auto workers has declined by 30%. 30%. And what Sean Fain, the head of the UAW, and others are saying is we are sick and tired of that corporate greed. Huge profits for the company, huge salaries, compensation packages for the CEOs, and we as workers are falling further and further behind. And the UAW is running a brilliant strike, and I think at the end of the day they're going to win it, and they're going to win it with a very good contract. But they're not the only ones. What we're seeing in America today, very importantly, is a revitalization of our American labor movement. We're seeing young people organizing around Starbucks and around Amazon. We're seeing young people on college campuses, graduate students who are being exploited as teachers, sitting down, forming unions and negotiating good contracts. We're seeing nurses, unbelievable. I'll be going probably to New Jersey within a couple of weeks. New Brunswick, New Jersey, where nurses have been on strike. You know what they're striking for? They're striking for decent nurse-patient ratios. They're overworked. They can't take care of their patients. And they're striking for their patients as well as for their ability to do their jobs. In my city of Burlington, Vermont, resident doctors, people who have MDs who are practicing medicine in the hospital, have organized a union so that they can get decent wages and benefits, which they previously did not, and they won that. So you're seeing a revitalization of the American labor movement in response to the inequalities that we're seeing in America and the level of corporate greed. So it's a very, very positive development to my mind.
Mm-hmm. Now you talk about it in your book in depth. Maybe you can describe for us how and when did capitalism become so unfettered, as you say?
Good. I mean, the book... Good question.
Okay, I'm glad.
Look, somebody goes out, starts a business, they got a good product, they work hard developing it, they make some money, good luck to them. But what we are, and you know, we have in my own state, and certainly in America and in Germany, you have a lot of small businesses, people who work really, really hard to make a living, and some of them are doing well, and that's great. But what I have focused on in this book is what has been happening in the last number of years. Give you just a few examples. Mm-hmm. When we talk about uber capitalism. Mm-hmm. I would say 50, 60 years ago, if you were the CEO of a major corporation, you would probably be making 30 or 40 times more than your average employee. That's pretty good. Do you know what the gap between CEO and employee is today?
50 times?
No.
100?
No.
Tell me.
400.
Wow.
All right. 400. 400 times. I think it's 399, not 400. But, and that's called excess. That's called incredible greed. Another example. Germany and the United States have recently gone through inflation periods, right? Mm-hmm. America was pretty high. And what a lot of people were saying is, well, inflation was caused by the war in Ukraine. It was caused by the breakdown in supply chains with China, etc. And that is partially true. But in America, at least, what economists have determined is that the major cause of inflation is nothing less than corporate greed, and the fact that corporation after corporation, whether it's in the oil industry, whether it is in the food industry, are enjoying record-breaking profits. So they took advantage of the chaos of COVID, of the war in Ukraine, of the breakdown in supply chains because of COVID, and they said, now is an opportunity for us to raise food prices, for us to raise oil prices. So if you look all across the board, these corporations are enjoying record-breaking profits while working people are having a hard time purchasing the products that they need. And when we talk about uber capitalism, here's another point. And again, we don't talk about these issues enough, but they should be talked about. There was once a time in America, we talked about America being a free enterprise, competitive society. You want to start a business, you go out there and you compete against other people, and that's the beauty of capitalism. Competition, and let the best product win. Today, if you study the issue, what you find in sector after sector, whether it is food, whether it is oil, whether it is media, whether it is transportation, whether it is agriculture, you find a very small number of very large corporations controlling the sectors, and in many cases able to establish the prices they want. And then you go a step further, and you take a look at some of the very large Wall Street firms like BlackRock or State Street or Vanguard, and you add their holdings together, their shareholdings together, turns out that they are the major shareholders in 95% of the major American corporations. So not only are we seeing massive levels of income and wealth inequality, and in America, 3 people now own more wealth than the bottom half of American society, but you are also seeing unprecedented levels of concentration of ownership. Add that together, that is real power, and that is what oligarchy is about.
Mm-hmm. Now, at the same time, and I think this makes your book so relevant for European countries like Germany, because we also see a rise in anti-democratic extremism, of conspiracy theories, of the far right, and you talk about it quite a lot in the book. In the US, we see it in the support for Trump, and really, I think, probably all of us asking ourselves, why is the white working class, because it is mainly the white working class, voting or supporting a billionaire like Trump?
Very important question. So you're 3 for 3.
It's only 10 minutes in.
All right, and I'll give you my answer, and not everybody in America agrees with me. It is very important, and I don't think we do it in America very well, and I'm not sure that you do it in Europe very well, is to go outside of our comfort zone. And that is, you know, we all hang around with our own friends and our own groups of people. And we kind of don't look at what's going on in other people's lives. And in America, and I speak only for America here, although I think there are some similar trends, although maybe not quite as bad in Europe. Here's what's going on. All right, you asked me about Trump, and why would anybody vote for Trump? He's a phony, he's a pathological liar, he's a billionaire, he's been indicted 4 times. Why would anybody vote for him? And let's take a look at what's going on in America. If you are a worker, member of the working class in rural America, the likelihood is that your standard of living is in decline. So you all this automation and all this increased productivity. It is possible that you may have had a job in a factory 30 years ago, and one day your owner came in and said, oh, by the way, we're shutting you down and we're moving to China. And maybe you were making decent wages at that point, and then you lost that job, you went around, and the wages, you got about 50% of that. So here is a fact that I want to impress upon everybody, because it's not talked about very much. One of the things I hope we'll talk about is media in general, and what gets discussed and what doesn't get discussed. But I want you all to hear this. In the United States today, the weekly wage of the average American worker today is lower in real inflation accounted for dollars than it was 50 years ago. All right, everyone understand what I'm saying? Think about the profound changes in all of society in 50 years. 50 years ago, there were no computers. There was no emails. There were no cell phones. There was no robotics, virtually none. Think about all of the transformations that have taken place in the economy, which has made the average worker much more productive than he or she was 50 years ago. And yet, despite all of those changes and increased worker productivity, the average American worker in real inflation accounted for dollars is worse off. So you're that worker. Your job went to China, and now you're working for half the wages you used to get. Well, maybe you want to send your kid to college. But the cost of college is very high, you can't do it. And in America, unlike European countries, we don't guarantee health care to all people. And maybe your wife became ill and ended up in the hospital, and you had zero or poor insurance, and you got a bill for $100,000. And maybe you have to declare bankruptcy. Or maybe you're a young parent and you just have a baby, and the cost of childcare in your community is $15,000 to $20,000 a year when you're making $50,000 a year. Or maybe you're an average worker and you're paying, and this is the case for 18 million households in America, you're paying 50% or more of your income on housing. 50%. Or maybe you're an older person, 55, 60, and you're thinking about retirement, and you know what? You don't have any money in the bank because your wages have not kept up with inflation. Think about retiring and being dependent on Social Security in America when people, by the way, are trying to cut that program, and it's not very much to begin with. So you add all of that together, and a whole lot of people in America are hurting. They're worried about the future. And then you're the Democratic candidate. I don't mean to pick on you, but you vote for me for all the good things we've done. And people look at you, what are you talking about? Do you even know that I exist? Do you care about me? Or are you just busy running around to the West Coast and New York and raising a whole lot of money from rich folks? So, which then takes you, again, I don't know how many Europeans know this, it takes you to a very corrupt political system that we have. So in America today, as a result of a terrible Supreme Court decision called Citizens United, virtually all campaign finance regulations were pushed aside. And that means today that any billionaire, and they're doing it, can put hundreds of millions of dollars into a political into a what's called a super PAC, political action organization committee. And that committee can then spend unlimited sums of money trying to defeat me or anybody else. All right? So billionaires have tremendous power over the political process. You add all of that together, and you have tens of millions of people who feel neglected, who feel that government has not only not responded to their needs, doesn't even understand their needs. And then you got Donald Trump coming along. Now, Donald Trump is nobody's fool. He may be a pathological liar. He may be a little bit crazy. He may be a crook, but he's not stupid. All right? Donald Trump was a very highly rated television, had a show. He had a TV show. And he knows audiences very well. He knows how to use TV very, very well. And he communicates quite well. And he lies a lot of the time, which kind of helps you when you're communicating. And that is, and then Trump says, you see, the political elites, they forgot about you, but I haven't. And I know what's going on and how desperate you are. And then he says, I also know what the cause of the problem is. The cause of the problem are immigrants, or the gay community, or Muslims, or you pick the minority that you want to attack, which is what demagogues have always done. So that is a little bit, in my view, how somebody like a Trump can become as effective as he has been.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting because you just mentioned the strategy of Trump, right? Where he scapegoats migrants and so on. Now, in Germany, we have an extreme right-wing party, which is becoming more and more strong. And the response of almost all of the other political parties, the parties in government as well as the conservatives, is to become stricter, to pass stricter measures on refugees and migrants. Do you think that it's a strategy, a useful strategy to curb the extreme right?
I'm sorry,
to curb, to keep them down, to get the voters back?
I think the most effective way, and this is tough stuff, it really is, but I think the most effective way to win back the working class to progressive politics is to expose the hypocrisy of the right, and equally important, is to address the real issues that working class people are facing. All right? Mm-hmm. But in order to really do that, I mean, people aren't stupid, and people want to understand why their lives are the way they are. Everybody does. Wake up in the morning. What's going on? How did we get here? Everybody feels that way. And if you are not prepared to tell the truth, in my view, about the power of the billionaire class and about oligarchy and about greed, I don't think you're able to honestly and effectively communicate with people. They want to know what's going on. Now, Trump can explain it. That's all the problems of transgender people or the gay community or Muslims or immigrants. He has an explanation. It happens to be a false explanation, but it is an explanation. What is the progressive explanation? Are we prepared to say that, for example, the climate crisis, which I hope we'll discuss in a minute, has a lot to do, or everything to do, with the fact that you have a fossil fuel industry that not only is destroying the planet, but has lied about the reality of climate change for the last 60 years? Are we prepared to talk about the fact that billionaires have enormous political power? They get all kinds of tax breaks. In America, I don't know about Germany or Europe, but in America, if you're a billionaire, your effective, i.e. your real tax rate, is lower than that of a truck driver or a nurse, because you have so many ways to avoid paying taxes. In other words, to be effective politically, in my experience, is you got to tell the truth. And the truth has a lot to do with the power of big money interests. And if you're not prepared to take them on, your message, I think, is not going to resonate with ordinary people.
Mm-hmm. We will talk about it in a second, about organizing and all that. But, there's just one thing I'm always wondering, because, and I don't want to, have like a hierarchy, but if you look at the communities in the US, the most disadvantaged, or one of the most disadvantaged communities, and most of them are working class, are African Americans, for example, right? Now, I'm always wondering, because you say the white working class, mainly the white working class, is voting or supporting Trump because, they don't have the money to send their kids to college, they can't afford healthcare and stuff like that. Now, this is also the case with a lot of African Americans, and I'm always wondering, why are, for example, African Americans in general always supporting more progressive candidates and not candidates with extreme political views like Trump?
Well, by the way, though, on that regard, you're right. And the African American community is the backbone of the Democratic Party. But what we are seeing also is the Latino community, which is larger than the African American community as an ethnic group. Their support is slipping very significantly from the Democrats. And there is some slippage, according to polls, among not black women, but black men as well, over to Trump's side. And I will give you the answer, which I think is fairly obvious. If you are African American in the United States, especially if you're an older person, you know what has happened in recent history. You know the struggles that people have had to go through to break down segregation of all forms, including voting rights in the South and in other parts of the country. And it is very clear on those issues, in recent years at least, not always, by the way, but in recent years, which side has stood with the African American community in their struggle. So for African Americans, politics is somewhat more real than it is maybe for many white folks. Because if you can't get a job because of the color of your skin, or your kid can't go to school, or your kid is going to a segregated and inferior school, it is very, very real. So you pay attention to politics in a way that the average white person may not, because you have been impacted by racist politics. So I think that's the reason that in many ways the African American community is politically more sophisticated, if you like. It doesn't fall for this right-wing extremism.
Now, you said that the Democratic Party, you write it in a book, has abandoned the workers' right. And you said under the presidents, Roosevelt, Truman, Kennedy, Johnson, it was identified as the party of the working class. Then what happened?
Good question. Good. I think back in the 30s, in the 40s, in the 50s, even up until Lyndon Johnson. If you were out on the street and you just did a poll, you talked to people, you said, well, which party in America represents the working class? I think the vast majority of people would say it's the Democratic Party. They may like it or may not like it, but they would say it would be the Democratic Party. Why is that? Well, going back to the 30s, what Franklin Delano Roosevelt did is transform the role of government in America. We were in the middle of the terrible Depression, and he brought the federal government into action to deal with job creation, to deal with unemployment benefits, to deal with nutrition programs in a way that the United States government had never done before. It was revolutionary. And he did that. He was elected in 32, and he ran again in 36. And when he ran in 1936, he said, and I'm paraphrasing him, he said, I am the most detested in so many words, among the ruling class of America. They hate me more than they have ever hated any president, and I welcome their hatred. He said that. He was prepared to make it very clear that they hated him because he was prepared to stand up to them. And if you're an ordinary person at that time, you're unemployed, you're a worker, you're a low-wage worker, you say, it's very clear whose side I am on. And I am on the side of President Roosevelt, and in 1936 he won a landslide victory. And that kind of policy continued, even up into Harry Truman, and to JFK a little bit, and Lyndon Johnson a lot more. Johnson ran, he won re-election, again, with a landslide victory because he developed a whole lot of programs that were of benefit to working families, including Medicaid and Medicare, et cetera, et cetera. But then, to answer your question, what happened is a lot of Democrats were looking around, they say, gee, the Republicans, they get a lot of money from corporate interests. Why are we turning our back? Let's get some money from them. And in the 70s, that began to happen. I think it is clear that more and more money from very wealthy people and corporate interests started to fill the coffers of the Democratic Party. And so the Democrats continue to give lip service to the needs of the working class, but they were getting a lot of money from wealthy people and corporate interests. And now, today, I was just on a TV show here where somebody pointed out President Biden, who's a friend of mine, received donations from well over 100 billionaires. You have large corporations, the drug companies give a lot of money to the Democratic Party and the Republican Party. And corporate interests have huge influence over both political parties. So I think what has evolved over the time is that the Democrats lost their focus and their relationship to the working class and became more of an elitist type party.
Now you're saying the Democratic Party, and maybe I have to explain, you are an independent, but you have always caucused with the Democrats. So you're saying the Democratic Party should be completely transformed in the book from the bottom up. What do you mean?
Okay, I'll tell you what I mean. And our campaigns have begun to do that, and some of that is actually happening right now. It is not an accident that President Biden recently became the first president in American history to walk a picket line with the United Automobile Workers. That's the first time that any president has done that. And what that's about is that the president has looked around him and he's making it clear that he intends to stand with the working class of this country. If you look at who the members are in the House of Representatives right now, we have 435 members of the House. I served 16 years in the House, and when I was first elected back in 1991, I helped form a group called the Progressive Caucus. I think we had 5 members. Today, that caucus has well over 100 members, and most of them are young. Many of them are young men and women of color, and they are an extraordinary group of people who are fighting not only for racial justice and climate justice, but fighting for economic justice as well. So we're seeing the Democratic Party move in that direction. When I dropped out of the presidential election, presidential Democratic race in 2020, President Biden and I sat down and we decided that he wasn't president then. We just decided to work on some task forces. And I said, he said he has his group of people, I have mine, and he understood that for him to get elected to beat Trump, he needed to have the support of the progressive movement. And one way you do it is to bring the strongest progressives that we could to sit down and talk about healthcare, talk about education, talk about climate, talk about the economy. What do we want to do? He had his people, we had our people, we had task forces, And a number of the results of those task forces have been implemented into policy. So I think in many respects, few would deny that the Democratic Party today is more progressive than it has been in past years. But we have a long way to go.
So maybe let's look at the Republicans as well, because you said, you've been for decades a member of the Congress. You're meeting the Republicans, in the committees. You talk with each other. So maybe you can, give us a little background. Like, how divided is the Republican Party really? Because here to us, of course, it seems very divisive. It seems that there's a small group of hardliners in the party. Are they really a small group and a minority? Or, where would you say is the Republican Party going?
Don't be fooled by what you read in the newspapers.
It's difficult if you say that because I'm working for the news, but
okay.
Thanks. So I'm taking it personally.
All right, so here's objectively what you have is here. You have a Congress where I think, I don't know, there are 5 or 6 or 7 more Republicans than Democrats, okay? Mm-hmm. And you have in the Republican Party former Speaker Kevin McCarthy, very, very, very conservative individual. But you have, 10, 15 of their 220 plus members who are really way, way, way out there. Mm-hmm. So their own view is they probably think that if the government doesn't have a budget, we can't pass a budget, appropriations bills, probably a good thing. That if the United States of America, the largest economy on earth, does not pay the bills that it owes every year, we have to pay our bills, like everybody in the world, every government, every individual, you got to pay your bills. And they said, no, we don't have to pay our bills. Well, if you don't pay your bills, you kind of start a worldwide recession. But that's okay too, because the chaos is probably good. It'll be bad for Biden. So they have very little responsibility. And McCarthy got into trouble because after a lot of thought and talking to a lot of people, he thought it might be a good idea for the United States to have a budget at least for 45 days. Okay. And that was too much for some of these really right-wing guys. And these guys, you should understand, if left alone, they would decimate every social program in America which helps working people. And they would give massive tax breaks to the rich. None of them will do anything for climate. Most of them don't even acknowledge the reality of climate change. That's the world that they are living in. So they are the extreme in a very, very conservative party. And that's what you're seeing as the chaos but going on right now. Whether or not this guy, Congressman Scalise, will be in fact elected, we don't know. But understand, it is a very, very right-wing U.S. House of Representatives.
Now, we probably all remember the pictures of the far right, the Trump supporters attacking the Capitol. You were in the Capitol at that day. You write in the book that you always expected Trump not to give up power easily, but did you ever expect something like that?
No. What I did, I think with some success, is a couple of months before the election, I worked with other people. I gave a speech, I think it was at George Washington University or Georgetown, where I said, look, what we have got to anticipate is the possibility that on election night, if Trump loses, he will not concede and he will not give up power. What do we do? So we talked about the various things that we had to do. One of the very simple things, for example, is that in America, our elections are different than European elections. In a sense, we have 50 separate elections. Each state has an election. And if you win Vermont, you get 3 electoral votes. If you win California, you'll get, I don't know how many, 30, 35. It's state by state. It just so happens that, the television will project earlier on. The states that close early often will provide are Republican states. So it will look like as the evening starts off, Trump is way ahead. What's going on now? There must be dishonesty. There must be fraud because Trump was way ahead. So we wanted to make it clear to everybody what was going to proceed on election night and to educate people about the ballot process, do a lot of that stuff. But to answer your question, what that day was about is there's an official ceremony by which each state presents the results of their election. And you have everybody knows what the results are, but the vice president, state of Wyoming gets up and there's 3 votes for this guy, and, for the president, 5 votes for Trump, whatever it may be. Each state makes their own declaration. Everybody knew what the result was, that Biden had won the Electoral College. It was unthinkable. What was stunning to me is, I think not only myself, but everybody in Congress, nobody would have thought that thousands of people would have attempted to prevent that process from going through and allowing Biden to be officially certified as president. And on top of that, despite security concerns that some had, the Capitol Police, and they were a very large group of police officers, were unprepared for what happened. And some of them ended up getting killed or dying on that day. And it took us hours to get the National Guard to come in from, I think, Virginia or Maryland to help out the Capitol Police. So, no, I don't think anybody thought that that could ever happen in America, or how unprepared we were from a security perspective to prevent that from happening.
I'm not sure if you feel comfortable with the next question, but could you say something about how you experienced that day in the Capitol?
I would say the word unbelievable was, it was just something that was not part of my consciousness, nor I think everybody else's consciousness. The idea that a group of extremists, A, would attempt to prevent Biden from getting elected, and B, that they would actually be able physically to take over much of the Capitol was really quite amazing. I will never forget, we were in there the Senate was doing part of its process, and suddenly some guy jumped up on the platform where only usually the president of the Senate is. And he said, he said so many words, we're having a problem right now. We can hear noise in the background, which is not new. There are often demonstrations out there. We're having a problem. Stay in your seats. Don't worry. Everything will be okay. And 5 minutes later or so, another guy came up and said, we're evacuating the Senate right now. And then with guys with machine guns, we were escorted to a room that could be easily secured. And in that whole process, I was in the Senate. On the House side, a woman actually got shot as they attempted to break into the House of Representatives. So it was, I would say the word unbelievable to me, something that one had never thought could conceivably happen, would be my response to your question.
Now, some of the ringleaders have been convicted to long prison sentences. Now, especially if we look at the upcoming elections, do you think this will have like a deterrent effect? That people will think, okay, people get convicted? Or you think it could happen again?
Well, I think if Trump is elected, there's a good chance that many of them will be pardoned or their sentences will be significant release. I think Trump sees them as heroes. It's very much a question of who wins. But I think most Americans were appalled by what they saw.
Now, I said in introduction, right, that you say if you fight for the working class, and you said it here again, you can win support across the political lines. So we talked quickly a bit about the climate crisis, but I want to talk about it again because that's obviously the pressing issue that the whole world is facing. Now, the working class is disproportionately affected by the climate crisis, rising food prices, restructuring of the economy, natural disasters like hurricanes. How can one bring together the climate protection interests and the working class interests?
Good. Well,
I feel like you're a teacher. You're like, good.
You're doing good. Keep going.
Okay.
All right, let's just make sure we're all on the same page here. Climate change is real. I know that that's a controversial statement, but the former president of the United States does not appreciate that, and many in his party do not. So climate change is there. The climate situation is getting worse, and I think this last summer, in America, in Europe, in China, in developing countries all over the world, has been a real wake-up call. Because if you didn't think climate change was disastrous before the summer, you learned what it was. I just personally, it's just one human being. My own state of Vermont, which is a small state in northern United States near the Canadian border, we experienced the worst natural disaster that we have had since 1927. We had the worst flooding that we have ever seen. Some 800 homes were damaged. Many businesses were damaged. Right now, the capital of our city is a beautiful city called Montpelier, Vermont. And if you go there right now, 2 months after the flood, many of the businesses in downtown Montpelier are still shut. That's my small state. I was in Washington during the summer, and I went out for a walk, and the air that I was breathing was absolutely disgusting. It was the most disgusting air that I've ever breathed in my life, and that was smoke coming from Quebec, because Canada has experienced the worst fires both on their east coast in Quebec and on their west coast as well. The west coast, you're getting smoke and ash. A friend of mine who represents the state of Washington says there are days when she has to scrape the ash off of her car, okay? In the Midwest in America, we're looking at drought. The wheat crop in Kansas, a major wheat producer, declined by 1/3. You had cities in Texas, in Arizona, where they had day after day record-breaking levels of heat temperature. But it's not just, obviously, the United States. In China, near the Beijing region, 1.5 million people were displaced by floods. In Iran, they had to shut down their whole society because the temperature went over 120 degrees. They wouldn't let kids go into school. In southern Africa, in some of the poorest countries on earth, drought is making it impossible for farmers to grow the food they need, and they're going hungry. And when you talk a moment ago about immigration and migration, one of the reasons, not the only one, has a lot to do with climate and people not having water or the ability to grow their own food. So that is a crisis. And nobody can predict what tomorrow will bring. But what the scientists tell us, that everything being equal, the situation will get worse. So if you think what we saw last summer was bad, it will likely get worse into the future. The difficulty of this issue is that it is not a German issue or an American issue or a Chinese issue. This is an issue that plunges the entire world together. If Germany tomorrow did everything that was right, it would not be enough, nor if America did everything that's right. We need the entire world to work together in a way that we have never, ever seen. And one of the concerns that I have is, historically, of course, it's been the major industrialized countries, the United States, Europe, that has produced the most carbon emissions. Now it happens, it is China. China is working in two ways. They're producing a lot of sustainable energy, a lot of wind and solar panels and so forth, a lot of electric vehicles. But they're also producing a lot of coal plants, which are making them the major emitter in the world. So it is terribly important. The future of the planet rests on the need of all countries to come together to massively cut back on carbon and move to energy efficiency and sustainable energy. Last point that I would make on this one, getting back to the issue of corporate greed. The scientists at companies like ExxonMobil and other oil companies knew 60 years ago what their emissions were doing. Their scientists said, you know what? We keep emitting carbon, we're going to warm the planet, and that is a very dangerous thing to do. And you know what the fossil fuel industry did? They lied. They lied then, and they're still lying today, and they took a lot of the money, their profits, and put it into organizations that tried to obfuscate the reality of climate change. So you have people right now who are destroying the planet, who have lied about the cause of climate change, and today are making tens and tens of billions of dollars in profit. Now, the good news here is that I don't know what you're doing in Europe, but in the United States, we have a number of states who are now suing the oil industry, the fossil fuel industry, and are saying, you lied to the American people of Minnesota or California, and we are spending billions of dollars trying to repair the damage that you have caused. And guess what? We are going to hold you accountable. You are going to pay the bill, not the taxpayers. And we're trying to do that at the federal level as well.
Now you've mentioned the media early on. Now we're going to talk about the media.
Let's talk about the media.
You say in the book that the rise of conspiracy theories and anti-democratic extremism is linked to the way media is reporting. Why?
All right, this is, and I have a lot of experience with the media, okay? All right.
Oh, you're getting up.
I'm getting up. The other questions were okay, but this is really important, so we got to get into this one. Okay. Now, if some newspaper, the New York Times or CNN, comments on Donald Trump, he will say, it's fake news, it's a lie. They're lying about me. My experience, having done probably thousands of interviews, is very, 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 very rarely does somebody lie about me. If I'm doing an interview, almost never does somebody mischaracterize what I'm saying. That is not the issue. So Trump is lying when he talks about fake news. What is the issue? What is the issue about media? What does media do and what do they not do? And now I speak mostly from my experience as an American politician. What media, corporate media, and in America it's important to understand, there are 8 major media conglomerates, which are huge, who control about 90% of what the American people see, hear, or read. So in America, and I'm sure it's true in Germany, you have cable television. So we have, God, I don't know, dozens and dozens and dozens of stations. Isn't that great? Got all these stations out there. Well, turns out, they're all owned by a few companies. So you got incredible concentration of ownership in the media, owned by billionaires. So what does that mean? How does that impact the type of news and issues that people discuss? The issue, for example, of income and wealth inequality is virtually never discussed on television in America. Never. You got 3 people who own more wealth than the bottom half of American society. Now, some of you may say, well, that's okay. That's the way the world goes. No problem. Some of you may be offended. I am. I think it's a very bad process. But how can anybody deny that that level of income and wealth inequality is enormously important? You agree with me?
You listen, I'm just a journalist.
All right. But what I'm saying is it's hard to deny its importance, no matter what your view may be. It is never, ever discussed. The power of the billionaire class in general, when we talk about politics, you're talking about power. I mean, a funny story here. Often the President of the United States is referred to as the most powerful person on earth. And a couple of weeks ago, I was very proud, I was glad that he did it. He walked the picket line in Detroit with the workers. But you could walk that picket line, and you could walk that picket line. He is the most powerful person on earth. You're the most powerful person on earth. How come you can't win that strike for workers? Why do you have to walk a picket line? Why don't you bring the companies into the Oval Office and work out something? And the answer is he doesn't have that power. I'll give you an example of the fossil fuel industry and what they are doing to the planet. In America, we are the only major country on earth that does not guarantee health care to all people as a human right. We spend, on average, about twice as much as Europe spends on health care. And I think without exception, every European country more or less guarantees health care to all people. We spend $13,000 a person, you got it? family of four, $52,000 on health care, and yet we have 85 million Americans who are uninsured or underinsured. We don't have enough doctors, nurses, mental health practitioners, dentists. We have a major crisis in our healthcare workforce. We pay by far the highest prices in the world for prescription drugs. In some cases, 10 times more than you pay here. Do you know how often the issue of how the American healthcare system differs from the Canadian system or European system is discussed? Never. Virtually never. Because of the power of the insurance companies and the drug companies. We have the highest rate of childhood poverty in America of almost any major country on earth. Virtually not discussed. So what happens is, what news is the news of the day. There will be a lot of discussion about the chaos in the House of Representatives, but not a lot of discussion about the money that elects people to the House of Representatives. So time and again, the most important systemic issues facing our country get no discussion at all. And that is a very serious crisis.
Now, I would think the US media would reply to that you have run for president, you had a very successful campaign, you have given countless interviews, so these issues have given a platform.
Well, that's a very good question. And I'm kind of notorious for this. Very often, when I do interviews, and reporters ask me a question, I say, that's a good question, and I ignore the question, and then proceed to give the answer.
I'm glad you answered mine.
I'm answering your questions. But what media will try to do is to, in fact, run away from the important issues. For example, I mentioned earlier that you have 8 major media conglomerates, Disney, Comcast, the Murdoch empire, that have enormous control over American media. Do you think that issue unto itself, corporate media control, has ever been discussed, or discussed almost at all? And the answer is very, very rarely.
Let's look at your campaign.
Let's look at my campaign.
Your campaigns. How were you able to mobilize so many young people?
I won't say that's a good question.
Yeah, I waited for it.
That's a good question.
Thank you.
The truth is that my wife, Jane, is sitting here with me, and she was involved in all these things. And what she will... Say, this is an audience that obviously knows who has the brains in the family, and it's not me. You know, in America, and I'm sure in Germany, people do a lot of polling, you know, how do we respond to this group and that group. We never once, ever said, how are we going to appeal to young people? Never once. And I would say that you know, we held many, many rallies and a million events. And one time, I'll never forget, what we do when you have a rally, at the end of the rally, you kind of you walk the rope line, which means there's usually some kind of barrier between the candidate and the audience, and you got some police over there and all that stuff. But you walk around and you shake hands and people come up. And you do that, and one guy came up to me, I think he's late 20s, and he said, you know what I like about you, Bernie? You treat us as if we are intelligent human beings. And that's after I probably gave an hour-and-a-half speech, which was not uncommon. I didn't give 10-minute speeches and 15 minutes. I gave long speeches. Because the issues that we're discussing this evening, and many others that we'll not discuss, they are difficult and complicated issues. And the world faces enormous challenges. And I don't have a 3-second answer, nor do you, nor does anybody, to these problems. So when I speak during a campaign, which other candidates did not do, Trump does, by the way, in his own way, we would give long speeches talking about the problems facing America. And I think young people appreciated that. And we have in America today, and I'm very proud of this, we have a generation of young people who are the most anti-racist, anti-sexist, anti-homophobic, pro-climate change generation in the history of America. It's a beautiful generation of young people. And we simply laid out the issues facing in the country. And young people are by nature idealistic. And they ask simple questions. Well, why not? If every other bloody country on earth guarantees health care to all people, why can't we? If the rich are not paying their fair share of taxes, why can't we demand and pass legislation to make it happen? Why can't we create millions of jobs moving toward a green economy? You know, why can't we wipe out bigotry in America? Why can't, and you know, the other day I was in Holland. Jane and I were in Holland. We were at the Leiden University, and we're talking to the very lovely young people there. And the tuition at that school, I don't know how it differs here in Germany, was like $3,000 a year, 3,000 euros a year. And you know what it is if you go to college in America now? It's 50, 60,000 plus room and board. Why? Why is it that European countries have the sense to understand that it makes it for the future of your country, you want the best educated young people that you can? Why? That's common sense. You're doing it. We're not doing it in America. You got a lot of working class young people of color who are not able to even go to college, and others who are leaving school deeply in debt. And the young people say, why is that? Why, interestingly enough, in America, 60 years ago, great universities like the University of California or the City University in New York City, great universities, were tuition free, and now they're very expensive. Why are we moving in the wrong direction? So young people were prepared to ask the hard questions and to want to make bold systemic changes in this country. They weren't hidebound with all the cynicism of, oh, you can't do it, this one doesn't allow it, this, that, and the other thing. They showed, and if there's one thing that I'm proud of in my campaign, is we showed both the economic and political establishment that despite what they may be telling us, the people of the country, not just young people, working class people, many people, want fundamental change in both the economy and political life of this country. And that's maybe the major thing that we accomplished. Mm-hmm.
That's interesting because in the book, you also criticize a lot the establishment. You're talking about the establishment, but aren't you part of the establishment? I mean, you've been mayor, senator, run for president, been part of politics for decades, making money with the books, I guess.
Yes. Make good
Aren't
money
you
with
part
the
of the
books.
establishment in a way?
If you write a best-selling book, you can make money, and
yeah.
I did. We'd like to see that in Germany as well, but no, we don't. Doesn't matter to us here. We got it for the American publisher. So, but you should buy the book anyhow, even if I don't make money. Well, I'm a United States senator. Mm. Okay, that's true. Does that make me part of the establishment? If you think so, okay, that's good. But you know, I was a mayor for 8 years, and we helped transform that city. We opened up the doors of City Hall to working people, to women, to gay community in a way that had never been done before. So, yes, I plead guilty. I am a member of the United States Senate. I'm chairman of an important committee. If you think that makes me into the establishment, okay. But between you and me, I don't think that's the case.
Obviously, a lot of people don't think that's the case because they supported you in your campaigns. And we've talked earlier about campaign contributions, right? That the parties rely on big donations, on super PACs. Now, you did it differently. You financed your campaign through small donations. How did you do that?
Well, I can take credit for it. We put together a team of really smart people who knew how to work the internet. But that was simply the tool. I can take credit for the other part of it. And that is, look, we said to the American people, we are not going to take any corporate PAC money because we're going to take these people on. We don't want their money. We don't need their money. They're not our friends. And the nature of our policy is we're not going to get many rich people contributing to our campaign. You know, I think almost all the Democratic, Republican candidates had many billionaires contributing. We didn't. So how do you run a serious campaign? And in America, it is a very expensive process. When we're talking many hundreds of billions of dollars. How do you do it? So we were pretty honest, and we said, look, here are the issues that we're running on. We think these are issues that can transform the country, that can take on the billionaire class and improve life of the working class of this country. But we can't run a serious campaign unless we have your help. And it turned out that we received, I don't know the exact number now, it's actually in the book, we received millions of individuals. Imagine that, millions of people make contributions, and they averaged in the first campaign, I think it was $27. And that was revolutionary for American politics. Never been done before. So either you had, progressive type candidates who couldn't raise any money, had no money, or you had candidates who were dependent on big money interests. But what we showed is that you could run a progressive campaign, well-funded, reasonably well-funded, and do it without going to the rich and the powerful. And that was revolutionary. And the other thing that we did in the campaign that was revolutionary is we could not get the kind of TV attention. I got on TV a lot, but not as, say, like a fraction of what Trump got on. I mean, just a tiny fraction over other candidates would get on. And how did we get around that? What we did is we held many, many rallies. Probably the main feature of our campaign, the way we campaigned was through rallies. And they were beautiful rallies. I mean, some cases we had as many as 25 or 30,000 people. Sometimes we do small meetings with 100 people or 200 people in a rural town someplace. And what we would almost always do is live stream the events. So it would happen that if I spoke to a group in Iowa of 2,000 people, say a group the size of this, we would live stream it all over the country, and hundreds of thousands of people would see it. So for the first time, really, people all over America, by the millions, were getting a chance to see what a progressive agenda looked like. That had never been the case before. And they were seeing it every night. So not only on a commercial television, we did debates, and I was on those as well, of course, but we also, on a regular basis, were speaking to hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people through our rallies. So the fact that we were able to raise money in small donations, and the fact that we were able to communicate people outside of the corporate media, so we gave an hour speech, that was broadcast to hundreds of thousands of people. That was transformative, I think, for American politics.
You write that your campaign shocked the political establishment, and the establishment did everything in its power to prevent you from prevailing. What happened, in your opinion?
Well, I think, in America, I think people understand that and know what happened. In the case of the 2020 campaign, again, in America, we do it state by state. The first state is a caucus, what's called a caucus, which is an interesting process. I won't bore you with all the details, but instead of dropping a ballot into a box, you assemble people all over. They assemble often in high school gyms, and they come together depending on which candidate they're for. So you'll see people here for Sanders and for Biden and for Elizabeth Warren over there and so forth and so on. We won that was the very first political event, and it gets a lot of attention because it's the first. Running in a field of I think 15 or 20 candidates, we ended up winning the Iowa caucus by 5,000 votes. And then you get on a plane and you fly right to New Hampshire, because they have a regular primary, not a caucus, where you do drop your ballot into a box. And we won that. Not by a whole lot, but we won that. And then we moved on to Nevada. So we had won the Iowa caucus and we won the New Hampshire caucus, the first two caucuses. And then we moved on to Nevada. And there was a myth going around, spread by my political opponents, that said, well, Bernie does okay in white states. Iowa is largely a white state, and New Hampshire is a very white state. But when you get to states where there are people of color, Bernie ain't going to win that. Well, we went to Nevada, which is one of the most diverse states in the country, large Latino population, African-American population, and we won that by a landslide. So we had won the first 3 states, and that got the establishment very, very nervous. And there were front page stories in the New York Times. At that point, Biden was not doing well at all. And the former mayor of New York City was running. He's a multi-billionaire. New York Times had a front page story. The establishment was thinking of rallying around him. But clearly what the establishment said, we got to defeat Bernie Sanders. And that was just fairly common knowledge. We went to South Carolina, where we did much better than we had done 4 years previously. Again, it was a very large field. We got 18% of the vote. Biden did much better, and he won that hands down. And the media was everybody was very excited. And then just at that moment, before we go into what is called Super Tuesday, which is the most important day of the election, because you have, I think, I can't remember, 15, 16 states are up. And in the polls, we were winning many of those states. We were winning in Texas, in California, I think in Massachusetts. We were winning many of those states. Well, what happened right then is that the establishment made it clear that they didn't want all of these other candidates, more moderate candidates, dividing up the vote. So on a given day or two, a lot of the candidates dropped out. And Biden then was able to gain the support of those candidates and defeat me. So if they had stayed in the race, I suspect we would have won. With them gone and supporting Biden, he became the favorite and won. So that's the Democratic establishment in action.
Before the 2020 elections, right, you've warned it was a battle over whether we would remain a democracy. What is at stake now with the upcoming elections?
It's the same issue, I would say, intensified. I think you have an embittered Trump, who's embittered personally, in the sense that he's now dealing with 4 separate indictments. What the courts are doing, what prosecutors are doing, is saying you broke the law, in different respects. So I think he is a bitter man and an angry man. I think many of his supporters are more angry than they were even previously. What Trump did when you deny, I've run in many elections, and I've lost elections and I've won elections, but what always happens, is, if you lose the election, you call up the guy who won the election, say, congratulations, you won, good luck, and then you try to learn, what did I do wrong? What should I have focused on? What do I learn from my defeat? But what Trump did, even before Election Day, he was saying, this is quoting, the only way that I can possibly lose this election, despite polls having him behind, the only way I can lose this election is if it's fraudulent. And you got millions of people believing that. Then he lost the election, so obviously it must be fraudulent. So you have an American president of the United States, who is working very, very hard to undermine the very foundations of our democracy. And I know that whatever happens in America has an important impact on Europe and around the world. And I know that in Europe you are struggling with these very same issues. But I think there is a reasonably good chance, I won't guarantee it, that we can beat Trump if we're smart. But if he wins, the foundations of American democracy are very much at risk.
Why are you not running this time?
I am not running because Joe Biden is the president, because I think it is terribly important that we defeat Trump and not divide the Democratic Party. And I think at this, I am, more interested in kind of policy, trying to address the many problems that we have. I'm chairman of an important committee, which we're trying to do some good work on. But what, in my opinion, what this moment is about in history is rallying progressive forces, and including people who are not so progressive, who simply believe in democracy. I mean, one of the important issues in this country, in this election, is whether or not women have the right to control their own bodies. And as I think all of you know, there has been a major attack by right-wing Republicans in states where they control, as a result of another terrible decision on the Supreme Court decision called the Dobbs case, taking away, undermining, nullifying what we call Roe versus Wade, guaranteeing women the right to abortion. And the Supreme Court took that away, and it's now going to the states, and states are moving very aggressively to deny women that right. If Trump wins, it will become increasingly difficult for women in America to control their own bodies. And I think you're seeing not only progressives, not only working class people, not only young people, but middle class, upper middle class women who are saying, you know what, I don't like, I maybe don't like Democrats or Bernie Sanders or whatever, but they're not going to take away my right to control my own body. So we're going to get support from that element, and we're going to get support from people, even Republicans, who really are disgusted with the vulgarity and dishonesty. He is a very dishonest person who embarrasses many people as former president of the United States. So what we're going to try to do is bring together a coalition, primarily of working people, of young people, of people of color, of people who may not be democratically inclined. I mean, sympathetic to the Democratic Party, but who do believe in democracy and don't want a president who's a liar. And if we could bring that together, we can win this election.
Now let's look at your vision for the future. You are saying the system needs transformational change. Can the capitalist system, in your opinion, be tamed, or do we need an alternative?
We need to tame it, and we need to move to an alternative. Look, this is not easy stuff. Politics is not easy, and this issue is especially not easy. I'll give you an example of what I mean. In America, I would say most of the CEOs of large corporations are pro-choice. They're usually well-educated people. Maybe their wives or their daughters have had abortions, and they think women should have the right to control their own bodies. Most, not all, major CEOs are non-racist. They will hire African Americans and Latinos and move them up the ladder. Many CEOs have no problem hiring people who are gay. But on the class issues, it becomes a very different story. And what you have are people, and I think to some degree it's not just a political issue or an economic issue. There's a bit of psychology going on here. In America, and I'm sure in Europe, we have addiction issues. We have lost 100,000 people to drug overdoses last year, people addicted to alcohol, to tobacco, to overeating, whatever it may be. Very serious. And yet I think many of these people are also have addiction issues, and their addiction is greed. And they can't stop themselves. Now, you would think that if you were a successful businessman and you made $5 billion, you'd be pretty happy with your $5 billion bucks. And you say, you know what, I have enough money to pay my workers, I'm making a lot of money, give my workers decent wages. So you want to form a union? Fine, form a union, we'll negotiate with it. No, I'm not going to go to Washington and hire lobbyists to cut my taxes or to cut Social Security so I don't have to pay taxes. I'm not going to do that. But these people are not nice people. And I mean that. They are very, and we don't talk about this, you see, we never talk about it. I'll give you an example. I was on an airplane a few weeks ago, and one of the flight attendants was a supporter, came up and she was thanked me for what I'm doing. She says, isn't it, and she started whispering, isn't it terrible how greedy these rich people are? She looked around them. See, we don't talk about it. If somebody does something that's racist, we talk about it. How dare you? You're sexist, how dare you? You're a homophobe, how dare you? But we're very nice to these billionaires. And they're not nice people. And they have... I mean, let me just give you and repeat this, and I want you to, I wrote about this in the book. If some kid in America walks into a store and holds it up and, God forbid, shoots somebody, and the person is captured, he will go to jail for many years, and depending on the state you live in, he may be executed because he committed a serious crime. He killed somebody. And we all think it's a serious crime. What do we say to the CEOs of large fossil fuel companies who are knowingly destroying the planet and lying about it? Are they good businessmen? Are they criminals? What are they? And if they're criminals, should they be held legally accountable? My point is, very few media never phrases it in that context. In Wall Street, you all remember, most of you remember the 2008 crash. At that point, major Wall Street firms were selling mortgages that were worthless, which precipitated the crisis. They knew they were worthless. Do you know how many of those major CEOs who destroyed the American economy and much of the world's economy went to jail? 0. Okay? Because they're above that. Kid robs a store, you will go to jail. You're a CEO who destroys the economy and people lose their jobs and their homes and their life savings. You're above the law. You're above the law. We don't touch you. And this is a hard issue. Media can't deal with it. Media is not conditioned to deal with it because they're owned by these guys. They're not supposed to ask these questions. But for all of us in general, it is a hard issue to deal with. I'm dealing right now, and it's blew me away. It's a personal experience. My office in the last couple of years has dealt with about a dozen strikes in America, most of them smaller strikes you have not heard of. And I'm thinking back to a strike that was taking place in Los Angeles, California, of mostly women who were working in a bakery. They were making a large bakery. They were baking cakes that go to the supermarkets around the country. And the person who owned that company was a billionaire. And their demands amounted to a few $100,000. Chicken feed, Trump change. And this guy was obstinate in not wanting, they were out on strike, they were Latino women, single moms. He fought them and fought. Finally, I think they ended up winning, half of what they wanted or something, and we helped them. But what struck me is we get involved in these strikes, is these are profitable corporations owned by billionaires who wanted to cut back on the health care that their workers got, the wages that their workers got. It was unbelievable. It really was shocking on a personal level. I mean, how much do you need? And these people really do want all the wealth and the power. And now, you should know, they're not only in the process of destroying the planet Earth, you got people like Musk and Bezos who are off to the moon and Mars. And there is, in case you don't know this, I didn't know this until the last couple of years. If you land a whatever you call it, a rocket on a meteor, these meteors have incredibly valuable rare elements. Did you all know that? And if you mine those elements, we're talking about hundreds and hundreds, if not billions of dollars, if not trillions of dollars. And in America, by the way, we have given them, we privatized that effort. They can own those meteors. So they are looking, and Musk is looking possibly for settlements on Mars, and maybe blowing up parts of Mars to make the climate there more adaptable to human development. So these guys really do want it all. And one other issue we didn't discuss, and I want to say a word on, is artificial intelligence and robotics. We are in the midst, and I don't know how much it's discussed here in Europe, but it is increasingly discussed in the United States. So we are in the midst of a major transformation of our economy in the sense that the jobs that you have today, in all likelihood, will not be the same job in 10 years, may not be there in 20 years. It's going to be a major transformation of the economy through robotics and artificial intelligence. In my view, technology is neither good nor bad. It is how it is used. Who is making the decisions about the radical transformation of the world economy? Who is making the decisions of whether people are going to be thrown out on the street in a factory and replaced by robots, and who benefits from that transition? So this is an issue of huge economic consequence, and in my view, we ought to fight really, really hard to make sure that working people benefit from this transition. So if we have machinery that can improve worker productivity, that's a good thing. And what we should be talking about is reducing the work week as a result with equal pay. And I'm going to... And in order to emphasize that point, I will be, it's a funny thing. In American law, the legal work week right now, established in 1940, is the 40-hour work week. We're going to try to reduce that 40-hour work week to a 32-hour work week, with workers keeping the same pay.
Now, Mr. Sanders, this is going to be my last question, to end on a hopeful note. You're writing the book that you're beginning to see cracks in the system. What makes you optimistic looking into the future?
Well, right now there are a couple of developments in the United States that make me feel very, very good. And we talked about this a while back, but the most significant is a tremendous increase in trade union activity in America. For many, many years, the unions were very weak. Their leadership was somewhat ossified, and corporations took advantage of that. What we're now seeing is young people wanting to form unions. We're seeing established unions like the Teamsters and the UAW fighting back and winning. And when they are fighting back, the issues they are raising are exactly the issues of the American economy. They're talking about corporate greed. They're talking about inequality. They're talking about the exploitation of American workers. So that is, to me, a very positive step forward. Number two, as I mentioned earlier, over the years, last 7, 8 years, we have elected a whole lot of strong, young progressives, not only to the House of Representatives in Washington, but in legislatures around the country. So you're going to see a whole lot of bright young people who are going to stand up and fight for workers and fight for climate justice and social justice as well. And lastly, we have in America not only, I think, an awakened working class that is prepared to fight back to the unions, we have just millions and millions of young people who really believe in America, know the kind of great country that we can be if we stand together and fight against all of those who are trying to divide us up. So as somebody who has gone around to every state in the country and met with so many young people, the youth of our country gives me a lot of hope for the future as well.
So, first of all, thank you, Bernie Sanders. Oh.
Thank you, Jana.
Thanks. Thank you.
For asking all of those great questions.
And thanks to all of you. for being here tonight and for everyone who's watching.
Thank you.
I'm just finishing a few more sentences because I want to thank the wonderful interpreters. There are Felix Kurz und Jan-Peter Hermann vom Dolmetsch-Kollektiv. Ja. The German edition of Bernie Sanders' book, Es ist okay, wütend auf den Kapitalismus zu sein, will be in stores October 14th. You can get it already outside in the bookstores of the Buchbox. And there are 100 signed editions by Bernie Sanders. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful evening. Thank you. It was great. Thanks.